The Supreme Court has once again enabled Donald Trump's worst impulses. Chief Justice John Roberts, acting alone, has allowed Donald Trump to continue building his golden ballroom while the full Supreme Court weighs Trump's emergency appeal. That is despite two lower courts ruling that Trump had exceeded his authority. Without the Supreme Court's ruling, Trump would have been forced to pause construction tomorrow. Trump has flagrantly continued construction of the ballroom despite the ongoing legal battle. In a filing submitted to the nation's highest court, the administration said that as of August 14th, construction was 65% complete on the $400 million privately funded project with a 250-person crew working 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. The price and the funding source is wildly optimistic, to put it generously. The Washington Post reports that, quote, the Trump administration plans to spend at least $900 million for construction projects on the White House grounds, a significantly larger price tag than has previously been reported, and one that would be covered primarily by, you guessed it, taxpayers. That is according to records reviewed by the Washington Post. The Post noting that the White House ballroom is the centerpiece of that construction. An appeals court had ruled earlier this month ordering Trump to halt construction of the ballroom, writing in its decision, quote, each president is a temporary tenant, not the owner of the White House and its executive residence. We are aware of no instance in American history in which a president unilaterally and using privately collected funds demolished substantial portions of the White House that Congress authorized to be built and American taxpayers paid for, until now. Worse still, the defendants argue that even if they are acting entirely without authority and lawlessly, no court, not the district court, this court, or the Supreme Court, has the power to stop them since the East Wing has already been destroyed. When asked when it became impossible for courts to stop this project, the defendants stated point blank, it would have been improper to enjoin it even on day one. And so your position is that this can't be stopped by a court, that the district court, this court, the Supreme Court, no court could stop the building of this today? Answer, yes. Imagine that you are wrong on the law. Imagine the statutes were as clear as could be, that you have no authority to do this and you've done it. There's nothing to be done. Answer, that is our position. The United States Supreme Court siding with the Trump administration, even as Donald Trump openly states they are powerless to rein him in. That is where we begin today. MS Now senior White House reporter Vaughn Hillyard is joining us from outside the White House grounds. Plus, former top DOJ official and general counsel for the FBI, our legal analyst Andrew Weissman is here. And with me at the table, MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin. Andrew, your interpretation of John Roberts' ruling today?
Well, a stay is supposed to keep the parties sort of in the same position so that the judges have time to assess the matter, so neither side is prejudiced. But here, what is happening is by the court saying that we are going to actually stay the stay that was going to go into effect. In other words, follow me, it's like a double negative. The Supreme Court saying there is a green light while the court hears the case for the Trump administration to go forward, not just with the sort of security portion, what's in the sort of basement, what's below the surface, that was never going to be stayed, but also the ballroom. And so they can go forward. And this is, to my view, the Supreme Court with a fresh scar on the rule of law in this country. I compare it to when they stayed Jack Smith's indictment in the case in Washington, D.C. They used a stay there to help Donald Trump by essentially making it clear that that case would never go to trial while Joe Biden was the president. Now they're using a stay to make it a de facto win where there's this race to get the building done before the court can rule, and the Supreme Court is going along with it, or at least the Chief Justice is.
To that point, Mr. Rubin, help me understand why this was just Justice Roberts on this and why this was one or two lines.
So this is what's called an administrative stay. It's sort of a stay while the court is considering the longer application for a stay. And the reason it's just Chief Justice Roberts is that he is the circuit justice for the Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. That means every federal appeals court in the country has a Supreme Court justice who sort of oversees the proceedings of that court. John Roberts is the circuit justice for the D.C. Circuit, which means he can make a decision on something like an administrative stay by himself. However, it is not typical for justices to make those decisions by themselves. They usually refer it to the entire court. And you'll notice in his one-paragraph order today, what he is saying is, I am staying the preliminary injunction pending further order from me or of the entire court. What I hear in that is this is not meant to be a stay for all time. This is meant to be a very short, brief pause. But the practical impact is exactly as Andrew just said. The practical impact is with 60+% of construction already complete, with 250 people on the ground, with the investment of the raw materials that we understand are on the White House property. Is this a race against the clock before the Supreme Court or a more full Supreme Court can say no and sort of reverse what John Roberts has done today on a temporary basis? Absolutely. They are giving Donald Trump what he wants, even if it is for a short and discrete period of time.
Well, especially Andrew Weissman, because as I understood it, there was no timeline specified. So how long are we really looking at here before we have a larger decision?
Well, that's a great question, because it could be what Lisa says, which is that it could be that we get a decision very quickly, but there is no end date to the stay that the Chief Justice has put into effect of the lower court's decision, meaning that if you are Donald Trump and the 250 people who are building the ballroom, you are full steam ahead, and it could be months before they rule, at which point this will already be a fait accompli, unless the Supreme Court's going to say, tear it down. And this to me is such a sort of lawless use of the stay power, because you really are not putting the parties sort of on ice. You are allowing one side to go forward. And here's the hypothetical, and it's what you referred to, Alicia, which was raised in the lower court, which is, let's assume that the Trump administration has no legal authority to do this, that as the lower courts have both ruled that this is a power of Congress, it is not a power that the president has. So let's take that, let's assume that's the law, that what you have is the Supreme Court saying, go forward anyway. You can go forward and have this unilateral action, even if the law is that you do not have that power. And so what the Chief Justice has done is really more than put his thumb on the scale. To me, this is really using the stay power to really rule in the Trump administration's favor and sort of duck the legal issue that they may very well just be violating the law, that this is not an executive power that they have. It's really for Congress to have made the decision to tear down a huge part of the White House.
Vaughn, as we have heard from Lisa, from Andrew, this may be framed as a pause, but the White House is now racing against the clock. You have the New York Times reporting this, quote, with the fate of his ballroom tied up in court, President Trump is racing against the clock. He's enlisted a team of 250 workers to push ahead with construction 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, to complete as much work as quickly as possible. This week, there are plans to install 1 million pounds of rebar and pour 3,000 cubic yards of concrete for a project that is now 2/3 complete, the administration said in a court filing. Now, with the matter pending before the Supreme Court, the Trump administration is making a practical appeal to the justices. The ballroom is simply too far along to be stopped now. Vaughn, you are joining us from the mothership. Talk us through what it looks like.
Right. I want to kind of give everybody an idea of where we are, because this is the closest that the public can get. We're literally on a public sidewalk here outside of the White House grounds, but also the press on a daily basis. You know, the press area where we do live shots from, the briefing room, that's on the northwest wing part of the campus. The ballroom is being constructed on the south lawn, on the east wing, of course, replacing the east wing here. And I want to let you see our terrific photog. Mike is going to zoom in. You can see some of the construction crews up on what even the Trump administration in their court filing said is now a 70-foot tall structure here. This is the best view. It's obstructed. I realize that. We're literally here along 15th Street in Washington, D.C. But outside of, 2 days ago when folks saw the press was able to come and see the helipad that Donald Trump wanted to show off, that was about the closest update that we have been able to get in terms of getting any video of the ballroom construction. And even in the filings from the Trump administration urging the Supreme Court to allow the construction to move forward, they effectively called this a hazardous situation. They used the word unstable to say that if the court stopped at midnight tonight the construction of the ballroom, that it would be an unstable construction site and would put the safety and the security of the White House at risk. And this is part of, I think, a lot of the question marks here at which the pace, you mentioned 20 hours a day in which those crews are working actively on this construction site, is that we are getting updates pretty much like the rest of the public. And unless you're following on Truth Social, Donald Trump's, AI-generated images of what he is calling a drone port that he says is going to be on top of the ballroom, you see in these legal filings the national security justification also being included in their urging of the Supreme Court to allow the construction to go forward, because it's not just the 5 levels underground, but in these AI-generated images to the